Hey, you're tuning in today to the podcast that explores how to create meaningful art experiences in the built environment. I'm Martha Weidman, CEO and co-founder of 9 Arts. I'm your host for the show, and our guest today is Rico Quirindongo, Interim Director at the Office of Planning and Community for the City of Seattle. Rico and I had the pleasure of working together for a high-impact project in Seattle Central District at 23rd and Union. And we worked together with Vivian Phillips and Juan Alonso, who you'll hear from on the show as well. Rico's got some really exciting perspective on how to reshape our approach to community development. He's achieved huge impacts and change and social justice through the built environment, and I look forward to sharing his perspective with you on the show today. You can learn more about Rico Quirindongo on LinkedIn. Make sure you check out his profile there. And his last name, in case you were wondering, Rico spelled like Rico, R-I-C-O, and Quirindongo, Quirindongo. And if you haven't already, check out our state-of-the-art report at 9.arts.com, where you can learn more about the statistics of ROI and art impact in the built environment. And enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. I'm excited to be on the show with you today and invite our guest, Rico Quirindongo, the Interim Director of the City of Seattle Office of Planning and Community Development. Rico and I have had the pleasure of working together on a project in Seattle that will come online and very, very soon. It's celebrating Black art and culture in the Central District at 23rd and Union. So really excited to have him on the show today to tell us a little bit more about his experience about art and culture in the built environment and how we can create a positive impact. Rico, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
So can you tell our listeners a little bit more about you, who you are, what you do, and why it matters?
Sure. So I'm a recovering architect. I went to undergraduate school for architecture in Washington University in St. Louis. I went to graduate school in architecture at the University of Washington in my home state and my home city of Seattle. And I then moved straight into practice. I was a part of a Black-owned firm, community-based practice. I joined that firm in 1996 and became an owner in 2008 with Donald King. And we didn't make it through all of that last downturn. So we had to close the doors in the end of 2013, and I joined a large firm, DLR Group, international firm, helping to build their civic practice. Did that for 7 years, and that's what got me ultimately recruited to join the mayor's cabinet for City of Seattle in my current role. The work has always been rooted around like how to make communities better, and that has always started with listening. Like, what do people need? What do they want? My belief is that we can achieve social change and social justice through built environment. And I see that happening on many different scales. And I think the engagement of our artist community is actually a big part of that.
Awesome. Well, I would love to hear more about that in particular. Do you have an example of a project that you've worked on where you felt like that exercise and listening led to some new discoveries that were executed in a way that has had a net positive impact on the community?
Straight out the gate, of course, I would talk about the project that you and I worked on together, which was the Midtown Square, which in the heart of the Central District, historically Black community in Seattle. That project, when I was invited in, I actually got a call from Patrick Foley, who was leading up the effort with Lake Union Partners to make that project happen. They'd already done 2 other projects, large developments, about 400 beds apiece, at that same intersection. The site that we were working on was one that the community felt particularly attached to. It was the site of much, a lot of energy, community gathering, historic identity in the neighborhood. And so having a white developer come in had already done 2 projects that really did not involve community, and then to have this third site where what at face value looked like pretty much the same program didn't feel right. And in Seattle, there's a design review process where you have to you're mandated in order to get your permit to do 2 large community meetings where you talk about the height, bulk, and scale of your project, and then as one meeting, and then another meeting where you talk about like more of what the programmatically is going to happen there and what the building will look like. And there's supposed to be chances for the community to weigh in. That process did not go well, and the city of Seattle, this was before I joined staff, told Lake Union Partners, the developer, that they needed to, that the community was not, did not feel any sense of resolution about what they were going to be doing on this block, and they needed to fix it before they were going to be able to see the project forward. I was brought in to help be a part of that bridge and reset the table for a different conversation. And I would not have called myself a community engagement expert before this, but the small community-based practice that we had, which was rooted very much in like coming into any particular circumstance to learn the needs of our client and the like community and users that that client served. We'd work for a lot of not-for-profits and providing social services and affordable housing and schoolwork and that sort of thing. With this project, I felt like I was coming in a little bit late to the party, and you already had a community that, quite frankly, was very angry at the time about the prospect of this project. But being able to, do open houses, one-on-one interviews, stakeholder group interview process, some online survey work, but then also meeting people where they're at, like, going to the local school, going to the local church, like talking about what we're doing, and then just like people that were already there for something else, being able to like weigh in and have that not be outside of their regular like experience, and me coming to them instead of the other way around. I think it's really important as it relates to trying to collect data around what does making a difference look like for communities in general, BIPOC communities of color specifically. And out of that process ultimately came this very robust, the creation of a very robust art program, which was designed to, and I think that we're seeing it happen, to really exhibit and celebrate the history and culture and place that is, the Black families and Black history of this community.
Yeah, it's not just about these, high impact installations. We heard from Juan Alonso on another episode of the podcast, and he's got the big hollyhocks installation going in on one side of the building, which is going to be stunning. But it's this ongoing activation that is such a critical piece of it. And not only ongoing activation with that culture concierge and celebrating Black arts and culture in the neighborhood and what's live, not just in this space, but in other areas. In addition, there's this concept of wealth creation that's a part of it, because the ultimate goal is for Art Noir to own their space, and all the other Black businesses and shops and store owners to become owners of that building, which is, I think, a huge leap forward in the concept of where that building is now and perhaps where it started.
Yeah, I mean, I think that idea of generational wealth building was a huge shift in the project focus, and being able to condominiumize the building to allow for Black ownership and wealth building is a fundamental change, which is needed. And hopefully, in my current role as the interim director of the Office of Planning and Community Development, we have an equitable development initiative which helps to provide capacity building for community not-for-profits or community-based organizations, but also provide grants for capital projects with that same desire and intent to grow generational wealth for BIPOC communities. And so, we now have the good fortune of being able to invest in this project and in that new art organization, Art Noir. It will be a case study for our program because it is a condominium in a larger development, which is not just another leased space, but actually a project that is growing wealth for the community.
So when you got involved and you were going through those initial outreach surveys and asking people who lived in this neighborhood, what do you want to see? What's your expectation? Did anything surprise you? I know you were coming in at a time that was probably later than expected on that project in particular at Midtown Square. But can you tell us a little bit more about what that feedback sounded like, and then how you worked to address it to really shift the perspectives? It sounds like so much of what you're describing is trust building.
It is, but I think that is always the case. I think, and as a recovering architect, I think that's the case on any project. Like if you don't start by listening, like you're not actually doing your job. So like with this project, I mean, everyone wants to be seen, everyone wants to be understood, everyone wants to see a reflection of themselves in the things that they engage in and that they care about. If I don't see myself in the thing, whatever that thing is, I'm probably not going to invest in it myself. And so I think that's that. So there weren't any surprises in that way in coming into like resetting a table for conversation. I do think that being able to just be a sounding board for folks, but then also, I mean, there's a lot of nitty gritty details that you get into. How much square footage is going to be turned over for community benefit? Like, what does that process look like? How is it vetted? Who's invited in? Like, all of those things is all of the minutia of the work related to the art program. We as a pure, in the capacity as an architect, I worked with the design team to identify where there were art opportunities and what those art opportunities looked like, including transforming, the entire faces of the buildings that face the public streets, which became canvases for two of our artists. That was a heavy lift. That was explicitly not what the design architect intended when that project was originally conceived. But I think that, that part of what's important for any project, and this is no different than that, is creating a structure such that the project can continue, or the site can continue to evolve and exhibit the culture and place over time. And I think the curation of continued activities and art on this site, which will happen through Art Noir in collaboration with Lake Union Partners. I mean, that's that was the biggest win of this thing that nobody saw coming.
There's so many success stories embedded in this project. I mean, you just touched on the art panels on the sides of the building, and I don't want to, skip over that because that became this. These are landmark, iconic panels that you can see from miles away, and they are the facade of the building, and they're artist created works, and they're just absolutely stunning. They make the building stand out. They give it an identity, and they've really transformed public perception. Everyone that I talk to says, "Oh yeah, I know that building. I've seen that's the one with the bright colors or the faces." So people know exactly what that building is from that landmark art example. So it's a huge success. And then ongoing with the impact of continuous evolution and continuous involvement with exhibitions at Art Noir and performances. There's going to be so much for people to see. So there's so many successes embedded within that one example that you brought up. And I'm curious to know if you have words of advice or words of wisdom for other developers. So I know, similar to the art world, the world of development and architecture is overwhelmingly white and male. So how can we advise or put forward uh, some advice for people who might be in the shoes of the developer side, you know, at the very early stages, conceiving of their next project?
It's a good question, and I think that this jurisdictionally, like the answer is going to be different from one city to the next. But I think that looking at how any development project can be successful, there's two very different points of departure. One is around what is the financial performer for the project and what makes it pencil, and then the other one, and that's a capital project side, right? Largely, and then there's a operations and maintenance side, which is how does life get brought into this site, this project? How does it continue to be successful and profitable over time? And that, in developer terms, often is, market study fodder, right? But I think it also, now we understand that it also has to be community engagement driven at the same time. So there's financial capital and there's cultural capital, and how do those come together to breathe life into a site? And I think that the reason I'm spending so much time talking about the money part is because I think that traditionally that is what brings developers to the table. That's what drives their businesses. And I think trying to connect the dots between financial capital and cultural capital is where these worlds meet. I think, if talking to Laking and Partners and other developers that have kind of led in this way, Liz Dunn is another one in Seattle that I think of related to this type of work. I think that they will tell you that in terms of the long life of a project, being able to engage a community to have some sense of ownership in the process and the product really does a great deal to ensure the project success over time.
You've had so many roles that give you diverse perspectives into the built environment and what we've been talking about, from being an entrepreneur and an architect to a civic leader and someone who's leading social change and social impact. I want to think about your perspective as a civic leader for a moment, and think about the difference between a city plan or city project and then a private development project. What is the difference between those two in their fundamental approaches, and what can they learn from each other?
Um, that's interesting. I mean, I worked on understanding that Midtown Square is a private project with a robust art program. By comparison, I also worked on the Climate Pledge Arena, which was a quasi public project, also invested in by a developer out of LA in a Seattle market. There wasn't, I think, to back up, one of the primary differences between large private versus large public projects. Large public projects have a 1% for art requirement in most jurisdictions. Seattle is no exception. So the city that you're working in has a requirement that in order to build on a site, in order to get your permit, that then you're also contributing back to the community through a public art program. And private side, that's not an explicit requirement. I think that in addition to that, all public projects, or put differently, all projects that include public dollars, you have to be able to easily identify the public benefit, and that what that public benefit is changes greatly from project to project. It's interesting, again, looking at my current role, the Equitable Development Initiative, the grants that we provide, which is millions of dollars, we are awarding in 2021 over $47 million in site acquisition, capacity building, and capital project dollars to community-based organizations, BIPOC communities. It is huge, and it's the largest dollar amount that this in the 5 years of this program. It's the largest dollar amount that we have put out into community. But what's interesting about it from a contracts perspective is that if we're providing, and I'm making up the number because the numbers range widely from project to project, $1 million to a not-for-profit for their capital project, part of what the contract requirement is over a certain period of time, 10 years, for example, what is the service or the return on investment that community sees out of that investment by the city. And so for any public project, that fiscal responsibility toward public benefit is the fundamental difference.
We've talked about some examples of building scale or project scale. Are there things that you think about from a planning perspective, that would impact an entire city? Perhaps they are in the city of Seattle or even in other cities that you feel like are good examples to promote community engagement or equitable development over time.
So there's a project that I'm thinking of called Freedom Homes down in the Bay Area. It's in the Tenderloin, which has been a really neighborhood where I think it's almost 350 families, mostly Black, in a 4-block area that are entering into a partnership with a developer where instead of the typical gentrification model, which is families get bought out, they get a check, and then they move somewhere else, typically south. In this case, there's a contract being entered into between all of those families and a developer, such that the developer gets to have land rights access to those properties and build them up to highest and best use. So mid-rise and high-rise towers, but also builds in 350 replacement homes for all of those families that are there. So they don't go away. They become a part of a development that they actually see a return on that investment themselves as well.
Do you see any trends in placemaking or how people are using art and culture in the built environment that you can predict for the future? Any trends that might be happening now that you think will continue?
Well, so this is not a direct answer to your question, but there is a trend happening nationally around the removal of highways, and why that's important. So, you know, what was it? The 50s, we had investment in infrastructure and highway infrastructure specifically that was a part of investment in cars. And now, as we look at placemaking and healing communities, what we know is that a lot, if we want to talk about environmental racism, a lot of BIPOC communities were torn asunder um, when highways were specifically designed to be put through them. Um, and so now a lot of what you're seeing happen is highways being reconfigured or being capped, or being removed such that those communities can be reknit. Um, and for artist communities that a lot of whom live in lower median income communities, those are the same communities. And so there is a lot of there are a lot of efforts that are being made across the nation, and there's a group. There's Project for Public Spaces is one group that does work in this area. Um, Also does a lot of work with markets and waterfronts. And then another group called Placemakers X, I believe, that is working with artists and BIPOC communities to like get a better understanding of how investing time that they don't have, right? Like everybody's like just trying to make ends meet, like take care of their families, they've got their job. And so taking the time to volunteer their time to visualize how to make their community better comes at a cost, a personal cost. But having the conversation about why that does matter and why that is important their for them and their family's future. I think there is more of that work being done now than there ever has been.
In closing, could you tell us about a piece of artwork or a personal art experience that made an impression on you or that was especially memorable? This might be a piece of architecture, a play, a concert, a recent visit somewhere.
Man, that's interesting. So for some reason, the Guggenheim Museum in New York popped into my head. So I'm just going to go with that. There's actually there was a exhibit there that I'm not going to remember the name of, that was uh, well known. Probably, gosh, I am old. Probably 25 years ago. Um, but that what was transformational about visiting the Guggenheim in New York? I mean, that's the one where like you walk into a volume, the central volume of that, it the building is a spiral, right? And you walk into the center of it, and you're looking up at I think it's a 10-story high space, and the whole spiral of that museum is one continuous ramp that takes you from the bottom to the top. I mean, going back to the fact of my earlier admission, I'm a recovering architect. Like that early on in my career was the melding of art and architecture and spatial experience that I think that I have always carried with me since then, because that was 20 years ago. That was the beginning of my career. Um, that has always made me thoughtful about how do we create cultural experiences and spaces that are transformational, because I well, architecture can be art if done thoughtfully and done well. um, there is a lot of construction of buildings that is not that, but as something to aspire to. It's always that is my heart space for sure. The name of the art piece that it was partially performance art and partially art installation, was called the Cremaster Cycle, Matthew Barry's film series from back then, which was a really, really long time ago.
Is there anything else that you'd like to share with me or our listeners?
We just have come through. I mean, 2020. The death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Like, there was so much pain and suffering and harm brought to the surface for a nation, not suffering that was not already there, but just experience that we became a little bit more honest about, or that has come back to the surface for, I'm just frankly, a lot of people that didn't have to think about the suffering and challenges of BIPOC community. I think that I think that as a Black leader working for a city now, and one that doing civic projects, doing public-private partnerships, I think are all part of the solution. I think that having a high level of sensitivity for what cultural value looks like, and knowing that there are a lot of institutional decisions that have been made that have made a lot of BIPOC families suffer. I think that the work that we are doing now in built environment, in policy, in investing in arts community, all of those things really can, should, and need to be seen through a lens of leading with equity and supporting social change for the betterment of all of us.
I'm just so grateful that we have you as a leader in architecture and design and at the city level, Rico. I think that the work you're doing every day to make communities better, to increase opportunities for community ownership and success is making a difference. And I've really enjoyed working with you. And I'm so glad that our leaders and listeners here today have had the chance to hear from you firsthand. I so value your opinion and thank you for everything that you're doing to build stronger places for our cities of the future.
Well, I thank you as well. You are doing some of that very same work.
Well, Rico, I know that there is a calico cat that keeps, none of our listeners can see this, but there's a calico cat that keeps wanting to jump in your lap. So I know, maybe we can get some purring on the mic. It's so cute. But I would love to be able to direct people to a place they can learn more about you and follow you and keep up with what you're doing. Where can our listeners find you?
If you in Google, just Google City of Seattle and Office of Planning and Community Development, or OPCD, and my name, you will find me.
Awesome. Hello, Kitty. You came back. All right. Thank you so much for Rico for being on the show today. You can find Rico Quirindongo, and his name is spelled RICO QUIRINDONGO. So you can find Rico online, check out the work that he's doing with the city of Seattle, and stay tuned for what he's got coming up in the future.
I have one other suggestion. I also did a TEDx recently, which is about built environment and impacting communities. So if you go to TEDx and look up my name, you can find me there also.
Fantastic. We'll send people to your TEDx page. That was a wonderful talk, and would love for people to go there and learn more about the work that Rico is doing and how to bring equity into your planning for the built environment. So thanks everyone for tuning in today. Rico, thank you again for being on the show. Always lovely to see you.
Thank you so much.
Well, thanks for tuning in for today's episode of ... And to keep up with our latest, be sure to subscribe to 9.arts on YouTube or to ... wherever you get your podcasts. Do you have feedback or ideas for the show? Well, email us at letstalk@9.arts.com. And until next time, on behalf of everyone at 9.arts, here's wishing you some inspiring art experiences.